All right. We have a quorum, and it is 10:30. Councillor Lewis, are you ready for us to get started?
Absolutely. Thank you for helping read the room. We're all here. So, Connor, if you could please
Okay.
take us away.
Thank you. So, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Um, as a reminder to all of our counselors today, we've got the gooseneck mic, so you don't need to mute or unmute yourself on Zoom. You can also keep your speakers completely muted as well. So with that, I'll go ahead.
Recording in progress.
For as long as people have called this place home, they've been welcomed with clean air, clean water, and an abundance of nature. As time went on, people saw the need to balance how we build cities with how we protect farms and forests. That's why across Greater Portland, in 24 cities and 3 counties, there's one metro government that brings us all together to maintain that vital balance, to provide services across cities and counties, to create a better future together. Hello, we're Metro. We plan for housing, jobs, and safe transportation. We protect land, air, and water by managing garbage and recycling. We support arts and culture by overseeing local venues to keep the economy growing. And we connect people to nature across 17,000 acres of parks and trails and at the Oregon Zoo. Metro is all of us working together, connecting how we live today with how we plan for the future. Hello, we're Metro, and so are you.
Thank you. We have a quorum. I'll call to order our Metro Council business meeting for December 7, 2023. Connor, is there a safety video?
Yes, could we please?
I'm Laura Lepley, a Metro Park Ranger. Here at Oxbow Park, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Welcome Center and you're at the Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk, and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Oxbow Park.
Okay. Connor, could you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Rosenthal.
Present.
Councillor Wong.
Present.
Councillor Nolan.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Gonzalez.
Present.
And Deputy Council President Lewis.
Present. Council President Lynn Peterson and Councillor Ashton Simpson both excused today. First item on our agenda is public communication. I will open public communication on non-agenda items, and please describe for our participants today our procedures.
Thank you. So if anyone wishes to testify on non-agenda items, now is the time to do so. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll manage the timer to go off at the 3-minute mark. If you've not already signed up to speak, you can do so now. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can sign up by hitting the raise hand button, which, depending on your version of Zoom, is either at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab. For those joining us in person, you can sign up by filling out one of the blue cards in the back of the room and bringing that up to me. For those joining on Zoom, I'll be promoting you to a full panelist, so I'll call your name. You'll see a window pop up asking you to accept the promotion. Once you do so, you'll be able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And as a reminder to everybody testifying today, you do not need to give your physical address. However, please do identify yourself for the record before testifying. So with that, Deputy Council President Lewis, councilors, we have not had anybody sign up in advance to speak today. And waiting just a couple of seconds to see if there are any hands going up. And seeing none, Deputy Council President Lewis.
Okay, seeing none, I am going to close public communication and move us along in our agenda. With that, I will call up Metro Auditor Brian Evans to present our audit results for the Affordable Housing Bond Audit.
Thank you, Metro Councilors, for having us today to present the results of our audit. I'm joined today by Angela Owens, who's a Principal Management Auditor in my office, and Mason Adkin, who's a Senior Management Auditor. And we're here to present the results of the Affordable Housing Bond that was released last month. The purpose of the audit was to determine if there were gaps or duplication in administrative controls to deliver on the Affordable Housing Bond's values, and to conclude on the status of recommendations that we previously made in the 2021 audit. Before we summarize the results of the audit, I want to remind everybody of some of the housing bond's core components. The $652 million measure was approved by voters in November 2018. The goal was to create at least 3,900 affordable housing units, of which 1,600 were supposed to be deeply affordable units for those making 30% of median family income, and 1,950 family-size units. The bond also made commitments to lead with racial equity, create opportunity for those in need, create opportunity throughout the region, and ensure long-term benefits and good use of public dollars. The audit found that Metro made significant progress on past audit recommendations and developed the foundational structures for its housing work. As more projects are completed, bond work is moving to the next phase. This will require the Housing Department to focus its efforts on outcome reporting and oversight processes to ensure the region's investment in affordable housing is sustained. Although progress has been made, the need for affordable housing continues to outpace availability in the region. The state of Oregon estimates that the three-county region will lose about 4,100 affordable housing units by 2032. This is because existing affordability restrictions will expire after a certain number of years. The bond is expected to deliver as many as 4,700 new units. This emphasizes the importance of building new and preserving existing affordable housing to increase the overall supply. I'm now going to turn it over to Angela and Mason to provide more details about each of the audit's conclusions.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Angela Owens. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a Principal Management Auditor in the Office of the Auditor. Our first audit objective was to conclude on the status of prior recommendations. And as Brian noted, we found that Metro made significant progress in this area. 7 out of 9 recommendations were fully implemented. Specifically, guidance and training were developed to ensure responsible stewardship of bond administrative funds. Procedures were developed and communicated to support fair and consistent consideration of funding requests. Reporting guidance was developed and used to provide information to monitor bond progress. Administrative workloads were evaluated and work was performed to increase the accuracy and transparency of the bond administration budget. For the in-process recommendations, we found that additional efforts could better ensure that quality control processes are in place for reporting reliable information. Community Oversight Committee conflict of interest disclosure forms are up to date, and that verbal disclosures are consistently documented. We also noted that full implementation of recommendations to develop metrics and targets for some of the outcomes might not be feasible at this time due to the complex governance structure of the bond and where some of the projects are in the development process. It's important to note that Metro did expect the data collected from this bond would be used to establish baselines and targets for future efforts. While this is reasonable, it did also limit Metro's ability to ensure current performance was meeting expectations. For example, workforce data was collected for some, but not all projects. Guidance for home ownership programs was not developed. Metrics for housing quality were not in place. So to strengthen bond oversight and prepare for the future, we recommended that the department identify and track metrics for housing quality, document conflict of interest disclosures consistently, and require committee members to update their disclosures if circumstances change. Our second objective was to identify gaps and redundancies in administrative controls. We evaluated 10 projects and found potential overcoverage in the review and approval processes and potential undercoverage for ongoing monitoring. We believe Metro is in a unique position to learn from projects to identify inefficient duplication and unintended gaps. While some duplication may be necessary to provide appropriate scrutiny to these projects we reviewed were considered, they were reviewed at the local level, at Metro, and often at the state level. We found examples of overlap in some of the information reviewed, examples of inconsistent standards, and potential for increased clarity. As a result, reviews took longer than anticipated. This suggested more consistency, coordination, and clarity could increase the efficiency of the review process. In terms of reporting, we found that processes were sufficient. We also believe they could be strengthened to better capture lessons learned. This could help Metro more systematically understand challenges, opportunities, and regional trends. We also found that Metro lacked a long-term monitoring plan for fulfilling some oversight and administrative commitments. Specifically, post-occupancy reporting related to community engagement and racial equity was gathered at one point in time, and a plan for how Metro will use and report on ongoing building and demographic information was not in place. This was important because the affordability of bond-funded units wasn't guaranteed over the life of the affordability period. Finally, the absence of a long-term housing plan made it difficult to understand the level of involvement expected of Metro and housing staff. This was relevant for two reasons. The first was that staff involvement appeared to be more robust in bond implementation than what was initially outlined in the bond's work plan. The second is that new construction, preservation of existing affordable units, and integration with supportive housing services and other funding sources will need to be collectively considered to sustain progress toward meeting the region's housing needs. To strengthen oversight, prepare for the future, and ensure activities are sufficiently funded, we recommended strengthening reporting requirements to capture lessons learned from each project, identifying ways to simplify project review and approval processes, developing a long-term affordable housing plan that clarifies Metro's roles and responsibilities, and identifying sources of funds to support those roles and responsibilities. Now I'll pass it off to Mason to discuss gaps found related to administrative funding.
Thanks, Angela. So we found gaps related to administrative spend and reporting. Our analysis found that the bond's administrative allocations will not cover administrative needs. Although this was expected when the bond was developed, it presents a challenge for understanding the actual cost of implementing the measure. Our analysis indicated it is possible that about $34 million in administrative costs will be covered from other sources. If another regional housing bond is pursued in the future, it will be important to understand the cost of administration to set realistic expectations among regional partners and the public. Also, actual administrative costs for bond projects were not reported. Quarterly reports were limited to bond disbursements and did not include administrative spending that may have been covered by other sources. While monitoring outside funds is not a requirement, more information about actual local partner administrative costs may be useful for informing future bonds. Metro's reports included administrative expenditures, but compared them to the overall budget, not an annual one. Without this annual information, it was difficult to know if Metro was meeting or exceeding expectations for fiscal responsibility. To strengthen bond oversight and prepare for the future, as well as ensure bond administrative activities are sufficiently funded, we recommended the Housing Department provide information to the Community Oversight Committee about how Metro's annual administrative spending compares to the annual budgeted amount, and that actual administrative trend data be used to inform potential future bonds.
So that concludes our presentation. I want to thank the COO and the housing director and their teams for their assistance during the audit. I'd also like to thank Angela and Mason for their work on this audit, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have, or you can wait until after the management response.
Yeah, thank you so much. My preference would be that we hear our management response before council asks questions.
To me? Okay. Yes.
I would think so.
Good morning, Deputy President Lewis and Metro councilors. Thank you again, Auditor Evans and team, for recognizing the significant progress made toward addressing the original audit findings while still shining a light on the ways in which this work can be improved upon. It is a bond like this that reinforces how a regional solution and Metro's unique position within this region can change lives for the better. The fact that this bond will build at least 4,700 affordable housing units, 800 above the original goal, 45% of which are in areas historically inaccessible to communities of color, and 42% of which are in areas that historically lacked affordable housing, demonstrates Metro's values in action. I also appreciate the audit's recognition that we are nowhere near solving the housing crisis plaguing our region, and that the gap between availability and affordability continues to widen, harming communities of color at a disproportionate rate. With all the affordable housing bond dollars fully committed by 2024, it's critical that the continued regional partnerships, investments, and innovative solutions are identified. In addition to Metro's involvement in statewide discussions convened by OHCS, the Oregon Housing Council, regarding state and local funding processes, we'll be conducting an assessment that will include identifying opportunities and gaps of the 2018 Affordable Housing Bond, lessons learned, and considerations for future funding. Additionally, as part of the 2023 annual report, we'll be asking our partners to report on trends related to cost escalation and housing quality and best practices for how to streamline project review and approval to strengthen Metro's ability to capture lessons learned. As the audit stated, quote, learning from the current bond presents an opportunity to use data to inform future decisions. And while another regional housing bond may increase the supply of affordable housing, it is unlikely to be the only one part of a long-term solution. Using the incredible success of this bond and continuing to assess gaps in the broader affordable housing system will pave the way towards sustainable solutions to mitigate this regional crisis. Thank you again for this in-depth audit and the opportunity to respond. Happy to take any questions.
And we also have Patricia on Zoom.
Wonderful, thank you. Counselors, anybody have questions? Councilor Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair Lewis, we appreciate it. Auditor Evans and team, thank you for coming forward with this report. I have two main questions around the major themes of the audit. The first is we discuss inefficiencies in project delivery, which goes from project solicitation to becoming fully occupied. And I think that you insinuate delays and things that might have increased cost over time. My question is, with what confidence can you say that that's down to Metro's process versus other funders, or versus the pandemic, or versus contracting and things like that? Does that question make sense in terms of the confidence level between Metro's process versus the collection of all the other partners that require a project to be successful?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Councilor Gonzalez. I think you're picking up exactly probably where us as auditors recognize where being too specific in a certain area might give the wrong impression. So all of those potential reasons that you listed for why things may have gone different than expected are things that we considered during the audit. And so we endeavored to try to see where there might be duplication, but did not go to the extent of trying to identify which specific aspect would be either duplication or inefficiency. And I think you're right to point out that you have a global pandemic that comes up that causes disruption. You have really tight supply chains, labor supply. You have cost escalation in materials, and so you also have a lot of new relationships, and Metro's role in developing these projects being different than it has, or different than the players in the past. So with all those combination of things, we didn't want to be too specific about where things could be more or less efficient, but we did recognize that those things would have an effect, and a fair amount of that is outside of anything that Metro directly can control.
Right, and so those inefficiencies, were they mostly looking at the text of our internal work plan and documents, or was there like an engagement of the other housing authority partners or, you know, actual developers that work on the project? I'm just trying to get a scope of that.
Yeah, I'll pass it off to Angela because she did the actual work there.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
Of course.
So we reviewed project documents, we reviewed work plans, a lot of project artifacts. That includes correspondence between Metro and partners, but are very limited in the amount of information and time that we can require, I guess, of the local jurisdictions or the state partners. And so our review of documents was really limited to what Metro maintains. We recognize there's a bigger story out there, and we really think that in saying that Metro is in a unique position, we really do see Metro as being able to work with those local jurisdictions to better understand those challenges and where the inefficiencies may exist.
Absolutely, thanks. Yeah, no, for sure. I understand that. My second and last question for now, there was a point that you made about an inconsistency in our work plan about the long-term monitoring of affordability, which I'm kind of curious to dive in both with what you've learned, but also with management. I'm not an affordable housing developer, but you know, I've definitely been exposed to multiple projects, and the nature of affordable housing is you have to layer so many different funding sources, and that kind of monitoring is, from my knowledge, built into the long-term compliance with the financiers, with state rules and things like that. So not necessarily saying that Metro, we usually give a small contribution to a project. So is your report saying that Metro is not doing it, or is it's not happening in general? What are the connections that we make with other kind of built-in monitoring mechanisms into these affordable housing projects?
I think, does Patricia want to speak to this, and then perhaps I can discuss what I was hoping to see and did not see.
For sure, for sure.
And I believe Emily Lieb is in the room.
I
would
just,
yeah,
come on up, Emily.
thanks.
I can't see a light. Am I on?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Amen.
Good morning, Metro Councilors. Emily Lieb, Housing Policy Director. You are correct, Councilor Gonzalez. There are, so every project has a long-term regulatory agreement that specifies a range of affordability for specific units in the building. Those regulatory agreements that are signed by our local jurisdiction partners, and the state and Metro has third-party beneficiary rights. Early in the bond process, we also executed an IGA with Oregon Housing and Community Services to provide ongoing data sharing related to their monitoring in recognition of our that we are not able to spend bond dollars on ongoing operating costs, and therefore would have limited capacity for that ongoing work. However, you know, as stated in our management response, we agree that there is a need to better clarify and understand capacity roles and responsibilities related to long-term monitoring. And so, as you see in our response, we're proposing to conduct an assessment in 2024 in coordination with our finance team and the COO's office to develop some recommendations around ongoing monitoring.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think more than I just with the audit wanted to make sure that, you know, there are built-in contingencies for us to monitor the long-term affordability and making sure that we're hopefully clear on that, and I appreciate the work for recommendations. My last one is just a short comment. I really appreciate how the audit emphasizes that the admin cap is not enough for most partners, you know, and I think we've had that realization that we've had to stretch all of us, all housing authorities and Metro, to really deliver and make this bond successful. So I guess thank you to everyone that put skin in the game beyond what was a part of the affordable housing bond allocation. So anyway, I want to appreciate that you're highlighting that, and I think future work in this area is a really good lesson learned for us. Thanks.
Great. Counselor Rosenthal?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I wanted to, quite loud here. I want to thank you for the audit and for the sort of the clear statements and the actionable items that go on with this. If in fact, considering how this started with a new program, if you had said everything was working perfectly, I would have said, you're not really telling the truth. This is quite not surprising that we found some things that we need to be doing better, and we knew this all along. And we have, we've been having briefings that said we don't have, the bond issue didn't allocate enough money for operations and management, et cetera. One of the questions, though, you mentioned several times a comprehensive housing plan. Now, my understanding is a bond issue, it was comprehensive only in that it said we were going to build 3,500 units. Or 3,700 units, I forget, 39, I guess. But it didn't specifically call out for developing a comprehensive housing plan. So do you have any thoughts or any comments on how comprehensive, in other words, what parties should be involved, how broadly it should be drawn, et cetera, et cetera? Because the bond was, you pass the bond, it is somewhat limited in its directives. And it didn't specifically call out developing a comprehensive plan before doing housing. It just said build housing. So any comments on that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. I think some of the tone that you're picking up is in the report is kind of from the history of how Metro usually addresses matters of regional concern, right? So the things that the voters have said, hey, Metro, we think this is a regional problem. We want you to get involved. And usually that's associated with some sort of plan about what the regional component of that looks like. Obviously recognize that this bond came before the supportive housing services measure, but when you look at those two measures in combination, you see Metro making a pretty strong statement that housing and housing services are an important part of regional concern. And historically, if you look at green space, if you look at solid waste, if you look at regional transportation planning, land use planning, there's an associated regional plan to go with it. And so I don't think we're commenting on what you all want to see from a regional plan. But when we ask the voters for money for regional services, I think it's a reasonable explanation to know, what does that role look like beyond just the bond measures.
Okay. I'll leave it there I think that answers it. It's a complex issue. As you say, we didn't have the SHS bond, and as you know, some of the cities and counties are still negotiating what they want to see in a housing plan, and then the state has weighed in. So if we had developed a housing plan, we would be modifying it.
Okay, Councilor Wong?
Yep, great, thank you, Deputy President Lewis. I actually wanted to continue that line of questioning. And this question is mainly for the staff. So, I see in the report that we're short 90,000 units of affordable housing in our region. And I really do think we need a long-term plan of how we'll begin to address that kind of at scale. And, in recommendation 6 on the management response, I see the timeline for creating a long-term housing plan. The scoping doesn't actually happen until July of 2024, with draft recommendations, being created by December of 2024. So I think 2 comments I have would be, why are we waiting until next fiscal year to start? That's a long time to wait. And we're also concurrently considering, future initiatives that may go to voters during this period. So how can we reconcile those timing differences where we don't really start, we don't really start the plan until next fiscal year, but we would have already referred potentially something by then, may or may not, I don't know. But there's just a timeline difference between, when this work would start and when voters might consider something, be it this year, next year, further in the future. We don't understand that yet, but having a plan before something goes to the voters seems like it would be the next natural step. So mainly a question for staff and how you would want to reconcile all these different moving parts.
I'm wondering if Patricia
is Grace.
Still on the line and we can promote her again, Connor.
She's here.
Maybe Patricia wants to go first.
Marisa, would you like to start on this?
Go ahead,
Would you like-
Patricia.
Okay, great. Thank you, Councillor Wong, for the comment and the question. I think a couple of considerations. One is that there is the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis that is taking place right now, and Metro's planning department is participant in working on that. And we will see those. I believe there is a plan to release those findings or that information in the summer. And so I think that we have to look at aligning our planning efforts with the Oregon Housing Need Analysis information that will come out. And we do plan to conduct a regional state of housing analysis to get an understanding of how the landscape has changed, incorporating our lessons learned. And we are still, we still have several more projects to roll out. And so there's a significant, in terms of the timing is, I'll say, complicated with a lot of factors to hold. But I think the sequencing that we have proposed is one that takes into account these many moving pieces that are not solely the responsibility of Metro, but really aligning with other efforts in the community. Our plan is to conduct this regional housing needs analysis, which would be, the regional state of housing analysis that we intend to conduct on a biennial basis, so that we can keep our finger on the pulse of the needs and how that's changing. And that analysis would include, the stakeholders in the community, funding sources, and to the auditor's point, SHS, for example, as a factor that's changed since the original bond came out. And then that analysis leading to some recommendations in a report. So I think in terms of a plan. So I do think that you're right to name that it would be ideal to have a plan in place before decision, so that council has that for decision making. And the timeline that we have outlined, while it isn't ideal, is one that takes into account the other pieces that we need to hold in order to create a good plan. And welcome Marisa and Emily as well.
I'll just chime in quickly before I hand it over to Liam and Emily. I think, part of our thinking is that we know at a high level that the need is incredibly large, 90 to 100,000 units. And so while I think over the mid to long term, a comprehensive plan that takes into account our urban growth strategies, our other partners is absolutely important. In the short term, we know that anything that we can do to increase housing, and specifically affordable housing, is going to move us in the right direction. So I think a plan can refine our strategies, but we also know that anything that we do to increase is going to be a positive.
And I don't have anything else to add to what Marisa and Patricia contributed.
I think what's concerning for me, and I get all the moving parts, and we know the end goal that we want to work towards. So I think it's just even the sense of urgency behind it. And, I think if there's any way to accelerate this timeline from next fiscal year to today, I think that would be helpful, just as we're starting to see these kind of moving parts come together. Just like tracking them, and maybe it's not like a full plan, but like we know where we want to get to. So what can we start doing today to ensure that everything we're doing is moving us towards that goal?
Thank you, Councillor. We will look for opportunities to accelerate that timeline as possible, and even if it is in sections, to be able to move the goal forward.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the good discussion. Auditor, management team, any last words? I think this is really a helpful discussion, particularly because we are at such an inflection point. We had an early audit. We've seen the places we've improved. We have places where we can increase our efficiency and delivery. But we can also look at this with a very rosy glow of having course corrected and continuous improvement within our program. And we've got lots more to do on housing, but we can be proud of the units that we have been able to get open, get delivered, and those that are currently breaking ground and in the front stages of development right now. So with that, I will bring us to the end of our presentation portion of the agenda. And again, thank the audit team for all the work. And next on our agenda, we have a consent agenda with 2 items. 4.1, the consideration of resolution 235365 for the purpose of amending and adding new federal discretionary plus Metro TISMO program awards to the 24-27 MTIP. And 4.2, consideration of resolution 235363 for the purpose of authorizing the chief operating officer to issue a renewed non-system license to Republic Services for transport of commercial food waste and yard debris mixed with residential food waste to the Pacific Region Compost. Is there a motion on the consent agenda?
I move to adopt the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
With a motion from Councilor Rosenthal and a second from Councilor Gonzalez, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Unanimous support of our consent agenda. Thank you, colleagues. I will move us into resolution 235361 for the purpose of Metro Council's acceptance of the results of the independent audit for financial activity during fiscal year ending June 30, 2023. And as a reminder, we do this work in compliance with Oregon statutes that require an annual independent audit of Metro's financial statements by an external certified accountant. The current contract has been awarded to Moss Adams, and we work with them through a competitive procurement process, but they've been our auditor for as long as I've been at Metro. And the annual comprehensive financial report has been completed by Metro Finance and Regulatory Services, and Moss Adams LLP has then audited the financial statements and issued an opinion. And the results have been reviewed both by the Metro auditor and the Metro Audit Committee members. And so we still have with us today Brian Evans, our elected Metro auditor, and joining Auditor Evans will be Brian Kennedy, our Chief Financial Officer, and Ashley Ostin from Moss Adams. Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal, is your hand up?
No,
way of
it's just to
introduction?
go down.
Okay, great. Thank you. I will hand it over to the audit team.
Thanks, Deputy President Lewis. You did a great job of covering my talking points, so I'll go through them quickly. But here, joined with Ashley Austin from Moss Adams and Brian Kennedy, Metro's Chief Financial Officer, to provide the management response. My office does not do financial audits, but we do manage the contract for the financial audit, so that's the reason I'm part of this presentation. As you correctly stated, Deputy President, Oregon law requires Metro to file a financial statement audit with the state by the end of the calendar year. This presentation and the accompanying resolution are the last steps in this year's financial audit process. And the purpose is to inform council and the public of the results, and if needed, which is not needed this time, to adopt any corrective action plan. Prior to today's presentation, Metro's Audit Committee met twice, once in May to hear about Moss Adams's plan for this year's financial audit, and the second time at the end of November to hear the results. I want to thank the members of the Audit Committee, including Councilor Rosenthal and Merck Commissioner Damian Hall, who serve on the commission, or on our Audit Committee, as well as the 4 community members, and special thanks to Andrew Carlstrom, who has agreed to serve one more year this year as we're trying to fill a vacancy. So I'll be initiating another recruitment process next month. So if anybody is interested in serving, would love to see you volunteer. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley and Brian to talk about the audit results.
It's already on. Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, counselors. Thank you for having me. I'm just going to go through the audit results and then open it up for any questions that you might have. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. The quick agenda is just to go through our auditor opinions and reports, which we issued last month, the required communications with those charged with governance, which we performed with the audit committee, as Auditor Evans already mentioned, but we'll give you the highlights here today, and then some other information. If you go 2 slides back now, forward, I'm sorry. Okay, this slide is pretty small, but it essentially says that Metro received a clean opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that you can receive. An unmodified opinion means that your financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. The third bullet on that slide is really related to the emphasis of matter that we included in the audit opinion this year related to Metro's adoption of 2 significant accounting standards in 2023. The first was GASB 94, which included Metro recording a $32.6 million receivable and deferred inflow of resources related to a public-private partnership. And then the other standard that was adopted was GASB 96, which resulted in a $1.4 million liability related to subscription use assets and liabilities being recorded, which I'm going to talk about in a few slides here, so I won't spend a ton of time there, but we did include that emphasis of matter in our opinion, essentially to alert the reader that, hey, something's new in the financial statements this year. It resulted in a large dollar amount being recorded in the financial statements. There are a few new note disclosures in the statements as a result, and so you should pay attention to that. It's nothing that's negative, it's just calling the reader's attention to those specific items. If you go to the next slide, please. We also issued 2 additional reports related to your single audit, which is your federal funds audit. You receive and spend more than $750,000 each year. The first opinion is related to the report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. Clean opinion this year, no control findings, no compliance findings. The second report is related to the specific buckets of funding that we audited in detail. The first was the endangered species and conservation funding, and then highway planning and construction. We subject those dollars to a lot more scrutiny. Anything that's over 50 cents, we have to look into if there's a deviation. We look at all of the direct and material compliance requirements. So we're looking at costs that are charged to the grant and funded by the grant, making sure that they're appropriate, allowable. We look at all sorts of other things too, reporting, et cetera. And as a result of our testing, we didn't have any control findings and no compliance findings. So clean opinion there as well. Finally, next slide, 2 additional opinions were included. The one on the top of that slide is really related to your Oregon municipal auditing standards, Again, no control findings, no compliance findings. That's because Metro is an Oregon municipal corporation, so you are required to comply with specific things around budget law, procurement, those types of things. We subject those to audit procedures and then, of course, issue an opinion on it, no control findings and no compliance findings, as I already mentioned. And the final item on that slide is related to Metro has engaged Moss Adams to report independently on the natural areas general obligation bonds, the affordable housing general obligation bonds, and parks and nature general obligation bonds, that all the expenditures that are recorded to those bonds are appropriate. And we pull additional samples related to those that they're in accordance with the bond measure. And based on our testing, we didn't identify any that didn't meet the stated purpose in the council resolutions. Those are the 3, or all of the opinions that we issued. So let's go on to the communications with those charged with governance. One more slide, please. So as Auditor Evans mentioned, we did have an in-depth discussion, including all of our required communications with the audit committee. We're just providing you with a highlight reel here today. We did have the attention focused on meeting the state requirement to file the audit report to the state by December 31st, 2023. So by meeting with you here today, helping Metro meet that deadline. We didn't identify any corrected audit adjustments. So a corrected audit adjustment, there are 2 types. One would be one that we identified that we said, management, you have to record this in order to receive a clean opinion. The second one would be if we identified an adjustment. It wasn't material, but management elected to post it. There were no corrected audit adjustments this year. We did have one uncorrected audit adjustment That was related to additional expenses that the counties had provided information to Metro later on in the audit process, where the counties had indicated that they had expended more related to supportive housing services than originally had reported back in August. They reported additional information to Metro at the end of October. The audit was pretty well complete by that point. So we did have a proposed audit adjustment, which just means that, yes, that amount is above our findings threshold. It needs to be communicated to management and to you as those charged with governance, but it's not material to the statements overall, and so we are okay with management passing on posting that adjustment to the books and records. The next kind of point there is really related to the adoption of GASB 94, which is public-private and public-public partnerships and availability payment arrangements. Metro has a few agreements with both two vendors, one, the gift shop at the zoo, and then food and beverage at the zoo, P5, and the Expo Center. And as a result of reading those contracts and looking at the standard, Metro is receiving payments on an annual basis outside of, just this year. They're receiving more than 5 years down the road payments in accordance with this contract. So they did record a receivable related to that. As I mentioned, $32.6 million. And then Metro also adopted GASB 96 this year, which is subscription-based IT arrangements, resulting in a right-to-use asset and corresponding liability in approximately $1.4 and $1.6 million. We didn't have any difficulties encountered in performing the audit, so everything that we requested, we were able to receive and look at. We received access to anyone that we wanted to talk to, and no disagreements with management about an accounting or auditing matter. Go to the next slide here. This is related to deficiencies in internal control. As I mentioned, there's no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies and non-compliance reported this year. We did have a few current year best practice recommendations related to IT practices specifically. I'm going to start at the bottom of the update on prior year recommendations though, because a couple of the IT recommendations that were included last year are repeats. So the administrative permissions, this is individuals with development responsibilities in your software, so they are able to go in and develop. They also have administrative access, so it creates a segregation of duties risk. So recommendation to resolve that segregation of duties risk. The user access reviews, again, is to improve documentation retention around who performed that user access review and the date of the review. And that's for USI and PeopleSoft Financials and HRMS. For OPEB census, Metro receives an actuarial evaluation every 2 years in order to test the information that Metro provides to the actuary. We pull a sample. Because they receive that report only every 2 years, we didn't test this particular item. It will be tested in 2024, and we'll be able to report back on whether that's been corrected. There were some errors in the information, not significant errors, but errors in the information that was provided to the actuary, and we reported that last year. And 2 additional IT recommendations that were new this year. The first, the IT team, in coordination with both IT management at Metro, FRS, identified a few additional systems that needed to be scoped in. And so there was some recognition that there needed to be information technology general controls, ITGCs, established around those new systems that were scoped in. And then finally, change management. This was just making documentation around changes made within the system and that documentation being retained. That's it for this slide. If you go to the next slide, 2 slides, please. There's only one new standard coming down the line, which is a little bit of a breath of fresh air. GASB has slowed down a little bit in its issuance of standards. So the next one that will be applicable to Metro is GASB 101 related to compensated absences. It won't be applicable until fiscal 2025. So have quite a bit of runway to talk to management about how that will impact them and how it will impact the statements. Open it up for questions.
Thank you so much for a really clear and crisp presentation of some really gnarly, meaty issues. Colleagues, questions? Counselor Rosenthal?
I just actually want to make a comment. I don't have a question. First of all, compliments to Brian and our staff for the work that they've been doing over the last year. Usually I do not like things that are boring, but this audit presentation meeting was actually a bit boring. And when it comes to audits, the financial audits, I mean, I don't mean the presentation was boring, but the fact that there was almost nothing to look at was boring in a sense, but wonderful. So thank you very much for your audit, and I think it was a pretty good report.
Great. I recognize that I'm not seeing everybody in the room because I'm at my house. So I know we have our Brian Kennedy, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Deputy Council President Lewis. I do. If you could bring up my slides. While we are very happy that the report from Moss Adams was kind of light on content, it's because we did a great job. So I want to take this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the end products of the audit and financial statement preparation, the annual comprehensive financial report, and our popular annual financial report. I'm going to start with the ACFR, so we describe it for short. I believe the ACFR is one of the most important documents, maybe the most important document that Metro produces every year. It is a comprehensive statement of our financial position and how we communicate that information to residents of the region, to taxpayers, to investors, and other stakeholders. It's an incredibly important document, and we are able to produce it every year on time. Not all governments do this. Not all large governments do this. Generally, best practice is to produce this report within 6 months of the close of your fiscal year, and we hit that target every year. I also want to note that the report includes recognition from the Government Finance Officers Association that our last year's report received their Certificate for Excellence in Financial Reporting. This is something that would be most remarkable if we didn't receive it, but it is a really important recognition that our report meets the highest standard in the industry for this sort of information. It's a rigorous process to go through, but it is one of our top priorities that we provide this excellent financial information. I also want to recognize that the ACFR can be a very intimidating document. It's long, has a lot of complex charts. If you're interested in perusing it, which I would encourage you to do so, there are some parts of the document that are really accessible. Management's discussion and analysis is designed to be exactly that. Materials for kind of non-experts to be able to consume the highlights and most important details of the ACFR. Our basic financial statements, while complex, are relatively short, and the notes to the financial statements provide a lot of really important context. So I want to jump in and go through a couple highlights. So next slide, please. Go back one. Huh. That's strange, that's blank. So a couple highlights. So the statement of net position, our net position in the statement of net position increased 20% to $955 million last fiscal year. That's a very large number, moving in the right direction. There was also the increase in net position. Thank you. Also a recognition that supportive housing services revenues are now Metro's largest source of revenues. It used to be charges for services. Just a continued recognition of the way that housing, which was not something that was really on Metro's radar prior to 2016, is now, from a financial perspective, one of the biggest and most important things we do. And then finally, there was an increase in business type activities of just under 10%. And this is mostly a reflection of venue activity returning to pre-pandemic levels, but then also some increase in solid waste activities. Next slide, please. The ACFR is not all kind of incomprehensibly large tables of numbers. It also has some helpful charts. The chart on the left shows our major governmental activities sources of revenue, and I included this to show that our biggest source of revenues are income taxes, personal income tax, and business income tax related to supportive housing services. If you look at the chart at the right, our major functions and program expenses, you'll see that housing is the single largest activity we have at 44% of our total expenses. I think our polling has showed that housing is the most important issue in the region, generally accepted by people, and our financial statements reflect that as well. It is where the primary source of our revenues and expenses are going on an annual basis. Next slide, please. I am also happy to be able to show you our popular annual financial report. This is something that was a program created by the Government Finance Officers Association in 1991, or their award program was created in 91. And the intent was to provide financial information extracted from our annual comprehensive financial report that's readily accessible and readable to the general population. I will say that accessible to the general population, we're still working on that. These reports are very complex. But similar to the ACFR, we also received GFOA's Certificate of Excellence for achievement in popular annual financial reporting. This is something we continue to work on. We're proud of this report. One thing that's new this year is we're including some measures of financial condition. You might recall in prior years when I came to talk to you about the ACFR, I would make statements like Metro's financial condition is strong and this document reflects that, but didn't share a lot of details. So one of the things we're trying to do is make some of those metrics kind of more visible to the public and able to show areas in which we are hopefully maintaining our strong financial position. So I'm going to run through a couple of the key metrics that we included in the PAFR for this year. Next slide, please. So the first two, on the left, the quick ratio, this is the ratio of our cash and investments to current liabilities. The standard here is we want that number to be equal to or greater than 1, meaning that we have more cash and investments than we have liabilities. And you can see that our cash and investments significantly exceed our liabilities. The quick ratio is a measure of our ability to meet our short-term obligations. And what you can see here is that Metro continues to be in a very strong position to do that. The metric on the right is debt as a percentage of our assessed value. So the blue line on the bottom shows our actual debt, general obligation debt as percentage of assessed value. We're hovering right around 0.5%. The orange line shows our statutory limit, 10%. We are well below our statutory limit, and that number is relatively consistent. Next slide, please. These two measures are our operations ratios, basically operating revenues to operating expenses. In an ideal world, that number is equal to or greater than 1. On the left are governmental activities, so things like parks, planning, housing. You can see that those numbers fluctuate over time. And part of this is one of the realities in assessing financial condition for local governments is that no metric is perfect. You have unique circumstances every year that generate some results that appear anomalous. So, in general, the trend is we are close to or above that line. Our operating revenues generally are meeting or exceeding our operating expenses. Some of the reasons for fluctuations are significant expenditures of one-time funds in a given year, but you'll also notice the dip in 2021, which was related to the pandemic, and we had impacts there. On the right side, this is our operations ratio for our business type funds, so the visitor venues and solid waste and the zoo. This one is kind of interesting in that the drop from 2018 through 2020 was primarily related to OCC's large renovation and the fact that we financed that renovation from our operating funds. We did not issue debt for that, so we had a decline. And then we had an influx of revenue in 21 and 22. So in general, when I look at these metrics, they support the contention that Metro's financial position continues to be strong. I would encourage you to check out the popular annual financial report for a longer list of metrics that we've assembled that we think kind of accurately reflect where we're going. The last thing I want to say is I want to thank Auditor Evans and Ashley Austin and the entire Moss Adams team for their work on the audit. We appreciate working with all of them. The process is easy. Expectations are very clear, and we're happy to be able to get through it as quickly as we can. And then finally, I want to thank my team. So Deputy Chief Financial Officer Caleb Ford, Controller Melissa Weber, Program Manager Erica Galucci, and the rest of the accounting team do an incredible amount of work getting us to this process. Producing these financial statements is incredibly complex. It's really challenging, and they make it look easy every year. And that's part of the reason we receive those certificates for excellence for our financial reports, and we're able to maintain a strong financial position. So thank you, everyone. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. And sorry, I did not mean to start questioning without your presentation, which was really detailed and helpful. The Thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, Chair Lewis. Let's see. Well, first and foremost, kudos to the team handling the endangered species federal grant and also the highway planning. I mean, everything over 50 cents is it's remarkable. So I just I know it's a best practice and it's standard to go through these processes, and our single audits are excellent always, but it's still no small feat for an everyday person to think through the effort that it takes to do that. Just to appreciate the effort, the partnership with Auditor Evans and Moss Adams as well to help us oversee this audit. I appreciate the emphasis on how housing has become such an important emphasis in our portfolio, both in revenues and expenditures. Just one really small question. Brian, you highlighted that our business through our venues has increased 9.7% in this last fiscal year. I'm just wondering, how is that compared to where we are now compared to pre-pandemic levels, and obviously trending in the right direction. But it just sparked the question I thought I'd ask. Aside from that, no questions of substance related to the audit.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. The picture varies across venues. I think all of our venues kind of in total are still below pre-pandemic levels of revenue. I think the zoo is probably closest to being fully back to normal. But in general, we're trending in the right direction. P5 and OCC in the current fiscal year, which was obviously not in the financial statements, I heard yesterday that P5 was close to, I think for the calendar year, pre-pandemic levels of attendance. I'm not sure the financial performance is going to be exactly at that level because some of the trends of people attending shows is a little bit different. But in general, we're moving back in that direction.
Awesome. Thank you.
Councilor Wong?
Great. Thank you, Deputy President, and thank you to the team, Moss Adams, Auditor Evans, and Brian, to your whole team. Great work. Excited to see clean audits. I have just two kind of bigger picture questions. My first question is, do our audits and how well they turn out, do they impact our bond ratings, or is that really more of a function of ongoing revenues?
Councilor Wong, I'm going to say yes. If we had negative results, I think that would definitely affect our bond ratings. Probably the kind of in the spirit of transparency, the methodology that the bond rating agencies use is proprietary, so we don't know exactly what the criteria is they use to set those ratings. Probably, to be fair, when it comes to our ratings for our general obligation debt, I would suspect the largest factor they look at is Oregon's kind of uniquely strong structure for the property taxes backing those bonds. But I do know that the results of our audits, our financial policies, the the information that's conveyed in our financial statements do matter.
And then there's no real other way to increase our bond ratings, right? Like, we're basically at the top and not much else we can do.
For the bond ratings for our general obligation debt, we have the highest rating possible. But it is a good reminder that it's important to stay on top of this, because in the event that we do issue debt for other purposes, that's not backed by Metro's full faith and credit and not backed by Oregon's unlimited property tax levy obligation, that we typically don't receive AAA ratings for those. The bonds we issued for the Convention Center Hotel, I think, were A+. Anyway, it's just reflecting the fact that it's a slightly less safe form of debt. So it's important for us to maintain good financial policies and clean audits in order to get the best possible rating for any other debt we issue.
Great, thanks. And kind of following up on, you know, the future and growth, you know, I'm kind of struck by how quickly, you know, Metro's revenues and budget has grown over the last, you know, 5 years or so. And, you know, I was also taking to heart Auditor Evans' comments about our administrative ability for the housing bond. And I'm wondering, kind of in your view in future years, like, how have we like kept up with that growth in a administrative oversight kind of perspective? Like, is it just like adding more staff, or like, yeah, what does it mean to scale up over time? And it seems like you've done that admirably, but, you know, is there a point or like a level where we're at the next level and requires a whole new kind of system or anything like that? Or are we at the very top of, you know, what a local government might need to continue this trend of, you know, strong oversight? Basically, is there another level that we have to work towards?
That's an excellent question, and I think the answer is yes, there is another level. Marisa has really prioritized over the last couple of years investments in our central services to make sure that we're able to meet the kind of evolving needs for central services and administrative oversight. And we've made a lot of significant investments in those areas that have let us stay on top. But one of the things we recognized in a priority from last year's budget that you're going to see again reflected this year's budget is that some of our back-end technology systems also need investments to enable us to keep up. And so that's a big priority for the agency right now, is looking at our financial systems, human resources systems, to make sure that we have something that meets the moment and is able to support all of our central services and our externally facing business operations.
And, you know, I think organizations get into trouble when they grow really quickly, and, you know, we have the system set up for now, but, you know, if you grow quickly and don't have systems that catch up, that's when you get into trouble. So I'm glad you're thinking about that. And do you have a rough estimate of like what revenue level is that next level? Is it like 3 billion, or I don't know, just so the council has some sense of like, if we reach this level, then we'll have to spend some significant time and energy to make sure our systems are there.
I think one of the challenges is it's not necessarily tied to the total dollar amount. We have some very small dollar programs that come with significant administrative responsibilities, and so we're trying to scale the level of central services, and in working with the executive team in the chief operating officer's office to make sure that we have systems that are responsive to the wide variety of needs, that we can handle the oversight and management of things like the affordable housing bond and supportive housing services, as well as having systems in place for, you know, relatively small grants compared to the rest of the agency, like the endangered species grant that the zoo received, or you know, we have an economic development grant that we're managing through the convention center in partnership with Travel Portland. So we have to have systems that are responsive to those small things as well as the very large things.
Great. Okay, well, great job. And, you know, I think I'm really thinking about how we continue to do a good job, you know, for the next 5 and 10 years. So anything that you need, please bring it to council. Thank you.
Yeah, really nicely said. Counselors, this is the opportunity to ask any question we need, but it's also a opportunity to make a motion if somebody would like to move resolution 235361.
Move adoption.
Second.
Got a motion from Counselor Nolan and a second from Counselor Gonzalez. Connor, could you please call roll?
Yes, thank you. Counselor Rosenthal.
Aye.
Counselor Wong.
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Nolan.
Yes.
And Deputy Council President Lewis.
Aye. Unanimous support of our resolution supporting the audit findings. Thank you, auditor, and CFO. It was a great presentation today. So at this time, I am going to recess our meeting of Metro Council, and I'm going to bring us back together and convene the Metro Contract Review Board. And before us as the Metro Contract Review Board, we have one item, and it is a consent item. Resolution number 235360 for the purpose of amending Metro's contracting and procurement administrative rules. And I would entertain a motion. It is a consent item.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second that, Counselor Lewis.
With the motion from Counselor Rosenthal and a second from Counselor Gonzalez, any further discussion?
I do have a question, Chair Lewis. I think Gabby's here, if we could ask.
Yeah, please.
Great. Thank you.
Good
All right.
morning, Gabby Schuster, Procurement Manager.
Hey, thank you so much for coming and for the opportunity to ask you a question. So I noticed throughout the documents that we're generally increasing our level from 150 to 250. My question was like, why? What is the 250? Like, why it feels a little arbitrary? Why not 500 or you know what I mean? I would just like to learn a little bit more about the reason for increasing the threshold, and if that was in one of the documents, I might have missed it. But I also wanted to get a sense from you about like how we're approaching it and why. Obviously, inflation and things cost more, so it makes more sense to reduce our burden. But I'm curious to learn from you on this.
Thank you, Councillor
Yeah, of
Gonzalez.
course.
Very good question. So generally speaking, this update, we consider it more of an administrative update because the state of Oregon has increased the thresholds.
Okay.
And the why, the communication from the Oregon state was not specific about that, but it has something to do with the high cost. When I think about my time in procurement services since 2012, the thresholds had only been updated once, and I remember from 100 to 150,000. And that was many years ago. So this is an attempt to allow a higher threshold for intermediate procurement. And there are some differences in intermediate and formal. So the $250,000 threshold provides a little more flexibility for public agencies to conduct procurements without having to publicly advertise them. So that is the state rule. It allows to increase, for example, diversity in contracting. You can look at small businesses, COVID certified businesses, invite them to bid and propose rather than putting it out in the public. And I think that was probably part of the state's intention to increase the diversity.
No, of course, great. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I was more so wondering, you know, what the jump was, what it is, which is to be consistent with the new kind of the state requirement. Excellent. That's all I really was curious about, because I know this, you know, this council in general has been very supportive of equitable procurement and, you know, exploring how to support that work. I think this is a very, very reasonable change to make. But again, I was just curious why 100 instead of, and if not more, and but that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Wong.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, kind of continue on that, like, increasing the limit could cut both ways. It could be, you know, more equitable or less. And I'm wondering what, if you just kind of briefly talk through the system that to ensure that, we have the most equitable contracting kind of as defined by our strategy on racial equity and all the other kind of plans, like how are those being manifested in your procurement process?
So at Metro, we try to always increase competition. So historically, we have always posted intermediate and formal procurements in the public. But we are looking at this threshold, the $250,000 threshold, as an opportunity to increase diversity in contracting. And so it is definitely our intention to use that threshold to invite firms to participate rather than just putting it out into the public, to look at. So we will probably, as we have been with the $150,000 threshold, we will be very strategic in inviting small firms in our region, whether certified or not, to participate in the process and reach out to them more.
Right. So you're able to directly contract and invite folks you want to contract with, but I guess what is the criteria that you're like, I'm gonna invite these firms to advance our goals? Like, is there like a document or scoring criteria internally or something?
So the scoring criteria is probably not different than just advertising it, but the strategy is different. We can have a more targeted strategy to reach out to businesses to participate in the competitive process. We do a lot of outreach work with our community-based organizations and partners, so it allows us to, have face-to-face conversations and be more intentional in letting people know that there is a contracting opportunity at Metro rather than just putting out an advertisement. So this, the increase from 150,000 to 250,000 is pretty significant for Metro because we have a lot of procurements in that $250,000 threshold. So it allows us to, even with our bidding system that we use, to send out invitations rather than just posting it and hoping for the best.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for the discussion. I look at the action in front of us as a pretty pro forma housekeeping item to make sure that our thresholds are in line with what's in state statute. But maybe this has brought forward a conversation we could continue in a work session sometime because lots of good thoughts here. But with that, I'm going to ask that we take a vote. Connor, could you please do a roll call?
Yes, thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Councilor Wong.
Aye.
Councilor Nolan.
Yes.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Yes.
And Deputy Council President Lewis.
Aye. Unanimous support for our resolution 235360. And thank you, Gabi, for being available today. With that, the Metro Contract Review Board is adjourned and the Metro Council is now reconvened. And we have Chief Operating Officer Communication.
Thank you, Deputy Council President Peterson, and hello again, Council. A quick share today, in preparation for some of our upcoming discussions around the regional waste plan and the budget. I have been reading through the 5th National Climate Assessment, which is the U.S. government's preeminent report on climate. And I just wanted to share a couple nuggets from that report that I think are important for all of us to be thinking about as you deliberate on policy and as we on the operational side think about how we're going to put those policies into action. The most striking quote from the report that I came across is this: current adaptation efforts and investments are insufficient to reduce today's climate-related risks and keep pace with future changes in the climate. And I'll just say that one more time. Current adaptation efforts and investments are insufficient to reduce today's climate-related risks and keep pace with future changes in the climate. It calls for more fundamental shifts. And I think as we look at next year, refreshing our 2040 vision for the region and the literal shape and contours of our region, our metro region, as you deliberate on the regional waste facility plan, as you consider adopting climate targets as part of the strategic targets work. You know, reading this really struck me that we need to be thinking about our fundamentals and how we shift the foundation of our organization to address the realities of what, you know, it's a little bit of dry language, but I think very powerful in what it's saying. You know, but just to end on a note of hope, because we know that fundamental changes can be disruptive. The report also says that, quote, the benefits of deep emission cuts for current and future generations far outweigh the costs. And I think that's the one of the North Stars that I think we need to keep in mind as we're all considering big changes and bold visions. So thank you.
Thank you. Counselors, any counselor communication? Counselor Gonzalez?
Thanks, Chair Lewis. Yeah, I think we've had conversations with each other about having more meaningful counselor communication. So on Monday, the Region 1 Act met, and I am the Metro representative on that committee. There were a few different things that the committee touched on, but there was one item that I want to bring to attention, and I'm sure y'all have kind of noticed the discussion around it, but just a precursor is Metro staff is tracking this very, very, very closely, but the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program made a presentation, and there was a really big conversation around design for a second aux lane, in which I tried my best to articulate very clearly Metro's position and articulating the risk that we believe that it would introduce into the project, the delays that it would introduce into the project, and really the importance of keeping the agreement that we have now, which is and not adding additional capacity beyond that. So just wanted to bring that up because it's a very important project and important item that we're tracking right now, and I want to make sure that you're aware of that development. That's all for me.
Thank you so much, Counselor. Counselor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just to comment on that climate issue that the Chief Operating Officer reported on. First of all, we heard that fairly loud when we heard the testimony on the RTP. About half of the comments were that we aren't investing enough in climate-related transportation issues, and transportation is about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions, so that's something. And as everybody noted, we had the highest temperature ever recorded in December a couple of days ago. So it adds a little cherry to the top, I guess. I wanted to report on the MERC meeting. The MERC meeting was yesterday. It was very interesting. The venues, the convention center, the expo center, and the downtown venues are doing quite well. They're getting books. They're getting a lot more interest. I should say the interest is picking up, not quite back to pre-pandemic levels, but it's doing quite well. The biggest problem seems to be right now is the lodging tax source of revenue that they have coming in, which softens the aspects looking forward. And the lodging tax is primarily soft in Multnomah County. It's quite good in Clark County and Washington County and even Clackamas County. So there is still some concern that this perception that things have been improving in Portland, but the media is not covering it as much. Although Portland seems to be the 13th most fun city. I think that was recently reported. So that was an interesting report. They're also moving forward on the evaluation of what to do with the Keller, whether the two options, others to remodel it or to build a new venue. I believe that they have narrowed down the number of venues. They still have a couple candidates within the central core. Downtown or east side, and so they're moving forward on that. I don't think I'm the one to report on that, but that'll continue moving forward, and we'll hear more about those potential options, and they could be both public-public or public-private partnerships in developing this going forward. There's a lot of, as they say, there's a lot of different aspects to this. So it's moving forward.
Wonderful, thank you. Further counselor communication? Counselor Nolan, are you ready to share how we spent last Thursday afternoon with our new friends?
Good idea. Thanks. I can do it, but unfortunately, my apologies to my colleagues. I did not do the prep that we talked about doing a couple days ago. Council President Peterson established, I think she did, I don't know if Marisa did, waste fee task force that the WPES department did a fabulous job of identifying and recruiting members of. The charge in front of this task force, you may have heard us talking about here, is to provide perspective and insight and advice to the council in the establishment of WPES fees for the 24-25 fiscal year. Principally, that would be the tip fee and the regional service fee. We have a tight agenda for this group laid out to wrap up the work of the task force by mid-March, and then you all will get a report from them. Councillor Lewis is the vice chair, and Councillor Simpson also serves on the task force with about 12 professionals from the industry and representatives of consumers.
Thank you so much. And that was the perfect summary. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It was on my list, and as chair, I wanted to defer to you.
Appreciate it, thanks. You're just as close to this as I am.
I'll report on it next week then. So on my list, this past Monday, the 4th, the Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee met, and of interest, they did a first look at the fiscal year 23 annual report. There's a contractor who actually does the writing, and they actually went through, like, basically not line by line, but section by section, what they want their reflection and questions to be. So there is an outline of that report in process. Then there was the CAP update for Multnomah County, which is a reoccurring item that will be on every oversight committee, looking at the items in the CAP and the kind of chart that gives the traffic light red, yellow, green. And then we received a Metro tax collections and disbursement update along with the Metro 5-year forecast presentation, and a lot of good questions around the planning over the next 5 years with the expected revenues far surpassing those initially anticipated. So good meeting there, starting to lay the foundation for how that oversight group is going to work with the unanticipated revenue question. Also wanted to report back to you colleagues, yesterday morning, the Portland Metropolitan Chamber did their annual economic summit. Council President Peterson and I were there. Really good presentation from a U of O economist. You know, nobody knows when a recession is coming, but we had about 18 slides that still were, as my layperson eyes reads, up and to the right. And we are definitely in a period where nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. But at the local government level, we're just along for the ride. And it was really good to be in a room full of people asking the same sort of questions about not only how the economy is shaping, but how we can take action for a more equitable economy, specifically in Portland and the region. And then lastly, I was with the Oregon City Commission last night, as they adopted a resolution very similar to ours, supporting the Coalition for Truth, Healing, Reconciliation of Indian Boarding Schools at the federal level. I'm really happy that Mayor McGriff brought that forward and hope that we can join other cities doing resolutions parallel to ours. Are there any other counselor communications or updates for our agenda today? Counselor Wong, anything from you?
Nope.
Okay, great. With that, I believe we are at the end, so I will come to adjournment and announce that our next meeting is Tuesday, December 12th at 10:30 a.m. Have a great day.
Recording stopped.